Alright, time for a demo. In the first demo of this module, we'll create the model. So I will be creating the domain data classes and the repository. We'll also register it with the services collection, so the container. Let's start by adding the models folder, in which we are going to put all model-related classes. I'm going to go here and right-click on my project and say New Folder, and I'm going to call this Models. This is again a convention. It's not really required in order for MVC to work that this folder is called Models, but if you follow that convention, it will be easier for other team members to know where to look. But it could be that you don't want to include this and make this part of your project and include them from a separate assembly, a separate project. And that also works fine, of course. Let's start by adding the first model class, and that's going to be the Pi class. I'm going to go here and I'm going to add a new class and call that class Pi. I'm going to paste in a number of properties. Remember, this code you can also find in the snippets. What did I add here? I added an ID, a Pi ID of type integer. I also added a name, short description, long description, and you can read the rest. There's a couple of these properties which are nullable. Using nullable is a feature that was added in C# 8, and I added nullable here, the question mark that is, on the properties that I do not require a value for. This could in fact be null inside of my database, and I want to reflect that here in code. And using this nullable also gives us the ability to, later on in the course, make the syntax a lot shorter to check if something is null. You don't have to write always those ifs. I do set the name therefore empty, because this value is not nullable and I want to indicate that here as well. You can also see here that category at the bottom is giving me a red squiggly. That's because I simply don't have the category type just yet. I also set that to default exclamation mark. That is the null forgiving operator. It's used in combination with nullable to declare that category in fact shouldn't be null. Now, indeed, we need to bring in that category type. Let's do that next in pretty much the same way. I'm going to add a new class here. It's going to be the category class. This class contains a category ID, a name, an optional description, that's nullable, and also a list of Pis. I also made that nullable. It's possible that we have categories which do not have a list of Pis. And also set category name to string empty because I do believe that is not going to be nullable inside of my application. If we now look back to the Pi type, well then that is satisfied. It now knows about category. Now you may be thinking, here at the top of these files, there's no using statements. Well, that is because inside of the project file, those implicit usings were enabled. This will, at compile time, make sure that the most commonly used using statements are generated and they're defined as global usings, meaning that in our classes, we don't need to repeat always the same using statements. I think this is a good improvement that we got with .NET 6. It makes our code a lot more readable. And I'm going to start by declaring the repository interface for Pis. The repository is going to be used to wrap all the data interaction logic and make sure that the consuming classes in my application, that is, are just talking with this repository. They don't need to know about the nitty details of the data access. Now this should be an interface, right? So I'm going to change that into interface here. And I'm going to declare what my IPy repository should be doing. I've added here an all Pis IEnumerable. That will give me back probably all the Pis in the implementation. Also, the Pis of the week is a property that we can get as an IEnumerable of Pi. If you look back at the Pi type, indeed I had a boolean here, which is not nullable. On the Pi type is Pi of the week, and then I can use then to filter, let's say, the Pis later on. And in this getPi_by_id method, I pass in the Pi ID, and that can possibly give me back a Pi. Let's do the same thing. Let's add another interface, now for working with categories. And that is, quite logically, the iCategory repository. Change it also into an interface. And it's simply going to contain the all categories IEnumerable. Now with just interfaces, we're really not going to get there. We also need implementations, right? So I'm now going to create the implementation of this interface. I am at this point going to bring in a mock version, a version that doesn't use the actual database just yet, not to overload us with too much information. For now, we'll work with a mock category and a mock Pi repository class. That will contain some hard-coded data. Let's bring in a new class. And let's this time start with the mock category repository class. That's now indeed a class that will implement the iCategory repository. We of course need to implement this interface. The all categories was the only thing I had in the iCategory repository, And I'm going to, as said, return a hard-coded list of categories. So you have 3 categories: fruit pies, cheesecakes, and seasonal pies. We'll do the same for pies. I'll go and bring in a mock pie repository, which of course implements the IPie repository this time. And let me paste in the implementation, which I do hope you take from the snippets. I'll show you why. I've now implemented the all pies property here, which is going to contain some hard-coded data for a list of pies. Let's collapse that because that's quite long. Then we have the pies of the week and the get pie by ID, and both are going to use the all pies, so this one here, and apply some link statements on there to get the correct values. We'll skip the search pies for now. So now we have an implementation for both the IPie repository and the iCategory repository. We need to let our application know about these so that we can use them in combination with dependency injection. So we need to register these classes, well, they are services, with the services collection. So we'll go back to the program, and again between the create builder and build, we are going to register our services now. This time, it is not framework services that I'm going to add. I'm going to bring in my own services, and we can register those in pretty much the same way. I'm going to again use builder.services. And now I have 3 methods available that I can use to register these services typically. We can use add_scoped, add_transient, or add_singleton. When using repositories, we will typically use add_scoped, since that will create a singleton while the request is being handled. So a single instance is going to be created when the request comes in, and as long as that request is being handled, that instance will be used. So it's pretty much singleton per request. Add_transient will create a new instance every time over and over again, whereas add_singleton will create just one singleton instance and keep that around. So for us, and for working with repositories that is, it is typical to use add_scoped. I will use the interface here, iCategory repository. Visual Studio doesn't know about that because now we do need to bring in a using statement to the Bethany Spatial.models namespace, and the implementation is going to be the mock category repository. I'll do the same, but then for the IPie repository. And of course, that is implemented by the mock pie repository. There we go. We've now created repositories for the 2 types we want to work with at this point in our application, so pies and categories, and I've registered those successfully with the DI container in our application.